So with E3's announcement this year of the Tales of Vesperia remaster, also known as Tales of Vesperia Definitive Edition, I thought I'd do a kind of retrospective on the game that so many Tales fans consider the best in the series. Tales of Vesperia, developed by Bandai Namco of course, is an action RPG originally released in August of 2008 on the Xbox 360. This was still relatively early in the console generation, and it was during a time where the PlayStation 3 wasn't doing particularly well outside of Japan. Conversely, the Xbox 360 wasn't doing so great in Japan, and one of the few spikes in sales of the console in Japan was due to Japanese gamers buying it for Tales of Vesperia. It makes sense they'd be hyped, I know I was. It was the first Tales game of that console generation, and so marked a huge leap in visual quality for the PlayStation 2 titles and GameCube title that came before it. And it wasn't just its visuals that saw an improvement in quality either. The game is known for having quite a bit of depth to its combat, which admittedly starts out a bit slow and limited, but as you progress, opens up a lot. On top of that, the game has a lot of content, which the developers added even more to in its enhanced PS3 version. Unfortunately, that extra content added in the PS3 version stayed exclusive to Japan, from the PS3 version's release in 2009 all the way up until now. The upcoming Tales of Vesperia Definitive Edition, however, will have all of this extra content. This means that instead of just the 7 party members that the original 360 version had, there will be 2 additional party members, Flynn and Patty. The PS3 version also included more arts, more weapons, more costumes, more minigames, and a lot more playable content, such as a second optional dungeon and more optional bosses. I first played Vesperia back in 2008 when it first came out on the 360. I remember a playable demo came out some months prior to release, and one day I just randomly came across that demo on the Xbox Live store. I had already played Tales of Symphonia on the GameCube at that point, but I didn't have a PS2 at the time, and so I had missed out on the previously released Tales of Legendia and Tales of the Abyss. Being a big fan of Symphonia, I remember I was excited that a Tales game was finally coming to a console I actually owned again. So, once Vesperia came out later that year at the end of summer break, I got it and played it, having a lot of fun along the way. It was the second Tales game I had played, and so holds a special place for me as a result. But, it being 10 years later, and me now owning all 16 games in the Tales series, how does it hold up currently, in my opinion? Well, let's find out. For context, I'm speaking as someone who has played Vesperia almost 7 times at this point. I played it 4 times on the 360 version, and then 3 times on the Japanese-only enhanced PS3 version. I first imported and played the PS3 version in spring of 2012, and that's the version I've primarily played ever since. Also, as a side note, I can read and understand Japanese well enough to play the game in Japanese. Now, let's compare what holds up well in Tales of Vesperia and what doesn't hold up so well. Starting with what holds up well. The characters. I was 15 years old when it came out, and I found the main protagonist, a 21-year-old man named Yuri Lowell, to be a really cool character. A lot of people seem to share this opinion. He had a calm, sarcastic attitude, his color scheme involved a lot of dark colors, he was voiced by Troy Baker in English, and he was fun to play during battle. He was very different from the main characters of the 9 Tales games prior to this one. But again, at the time I first played Vesperia, the only other Tales game I had played was Symphonia, so I didn't have much to compare him to within the series. But even still, Yuri was different from a lot of the main characters of Japanese RPGs in general. There were aspects of his character I do take issue with, however, but I'll get into that later, when we move on to the negatives. The playable cast in general is one of Vesperia's strong points. They all play off each other very well, and by the end of the game, they've all forged a strong relationship with one another. You don't have that awkward issue that some games in the series, and other RPGs for that matter, have where certain characters in the party almost never talk to each other. It's also great that in the PS3 version and soon-to-be-released Definitive Edition, you get 9 party members instead of 7. The voice acting. Going back to the topic of voice acting for a bit, I've got to say, Vesperia probably has one of, if not the best English dubs in the series. All the characters are well cast, except for maybe 1 or 2 minor characters. I personally don't feel this English dub has been topped yet. I don't know exactly how they will handle the dubbing of the new lines of dialogue from the PS3 version though, considering not all these voice actors are easy to get now, particularly Troy Baker. The Japanese dub is good too, and it's hard for me to say which dub I prefer overall. It kinda depends on which character you're talking about. For example, I prefer Yuri in English, but I prefer Estelle in Japanese. Either way, the characters' voices fit them in both languages. Vesperia was also the first English dubbed game in the series to actually dub all the skits too. For anyone who doesn't know, skits are optional short conversations between the characters that the player can call out by pressing a button when a skit is ready, shown at the bottom of the screen. This feature is present in many Tales games prior to Vesperia, but in the English versions, they never bothered to voice them all until this game. Both the English and Japanese dubs will be included in the definitive edition. The visuals. I think just from watching this video you can tell this, but the visuals for Vesperia also hold up extremely well. The game uses a cel-shaded art style, which tends to age well for video games. Nothing in the game is actually all that complex of a model or texture, but everything is given the same amount of polish and visual flair. The game is colorful, and everything from the world map, towns, and dungeons to the special attacks and magic effects still look great to this day. Music and sound design. The soundtrack ranges from passable to some really kick-ass themes. There isn't really any music that stands out as bad in this game, though I do have to say that I don't really like the first battle theme. Some really good songs in this game are the second battle theme, third battle theme, and the sword dancer theme, to name a few. Sound effects during battle are great and really help give everything a sense of impact. The only sound effect I don't like is the sound the sorcerer's ring makes when you fire it. Combat and gameplay. Since this is a JRPG, it means you'll spend a lot of time in battle, so how does that aspect of the game hold up? Tales of Vesperia follows the basic battle structure established back in Tales of Fantasia, the first Tales game. You have basic attacks, which most characters can perform 3 times in a row, and you can combine the basic attack button with holding a direction of the left analog stick to change up your attack animations. You also have special attacks, known as arts. Arts are flashier than your normal attacks, and can be of the physical variety, using your weapon to deal damage to foes via special techniques, or the magical variety, using magic to aid your allies or wipe out your foes. Arts usually cost a resource known as technical points, or TP, unlike basic attacks, which actually fill up your TP bar when you land basic attacks on enemies. This simplicity allows players to easily jump into the game, which I feel is actually a strong point for many games in the Tales series, not just Vesperia. The fundamentals of the battle system are simple, only requiring 2 attack buttons and a guard button. However, if you want to get good at Vesperia and play on the higher difficulty settings, you'll have to take the time to learn the intricacies of the battle system, your playable characters, and learn skills off of equipment that help boost up your characters. Arts are categorized into base arts, which are simpler, less costly special attacks, and arcane arts, which cost more TP but deal more damage than base arts. By default, you can automatically chain a base art into an arcane art, but you can get skills that will allow you to chain base arts into other base arts, arcane arts into other arcane arts, and so on and so forth. There is also a third category of arts in this game known as altered arts, which you learn by performing an art while certain skills are equipped to a character. Between your basic attacks, 3 different types of arts, and the series staple overlimit system, you can perform really elaborate combos, and there are a lot of ways to play each character. Vesperia boasts probably the most diversity in its playable cast when it comes to their combat rules. The number of special attacks they have, the number of passive skills you can equip to them that tangibly affect their gameplay, and the amount of depth available in the combat system. Vesperia is one of the few games in the series that I find I can learn something new almost every time I play it. It's a game where you'll rarely find anyone who can play every character well, because each character takes time to learn. They all play very differently, leading to players gravitating towards their own favorites rather than being able to use them all interchangeably, like in some of the most recent games in the series. Not everyone will fall in love with the gameplay, but to sum it up, it's accessible while offering tons of depth and replay value due to the diversity of the cast and the breadth of content available in the game. Speaking of content, that moves me on to the last aspect of the game I feel holds up well, the sheer amount of content. It is no exaggeration to say that Vesperia has the most playable content in the series, especially when factoring in the PS3 version's added content. There are lots of side quests to do along the course of the game, lots of costumes to obtain, minigames to play, weapons to collect with skills to unlock, and after you beat the final boss you unlock even more optional content to explore. 2 bonus dungeons, the Colosseum challenges, hidden bosses, and more await players who like to do more than just the main story in their games. I spent 150 hours on just my first playthrough of the PS3 version alone. I'd say the main story will take most players 40 to 60 hours to beat, depending on what difficulty you play on and your gaming pace. If you add in all the optional content, you can easily hit or surpass 100 hours, just like I did. As per usual for the Tales series, Vesperia also has a New Game Plus feature. Many Tales games have something called Grade, which you are awarded with at the end of every battle, which basically rates you on your performance. You lose grade when you do certain things like letting characters die during a fight, and you earn grade for doing things like striking an enemy's elemental weakness or juggling enemies in the air. After beating the game, you can then use this grade when you start a New Game Plus, allowing you to spend this grade on various purchases in a grade shop to help you on your next adventure. Vesperia to this day is probably the only game in the series that lets you carry over all your equipment, armor, and weapons. So, in my opinion, has one of the best grade shops in the series. Considering characters learn passive skills off of their weapons in this game, that's probably one of the reasons they actually let you keep your weapons this time. Whew! Okay, that's enough gushing about the game for now. I now would like to talk about the aspects of the game that don't hold up quite as well. The next subject will be the plot and the themes, so if you'd like to go into this game completely unspoiled, please skip ahead to the timestamp on your screen. Plot and themes. I never found the plot of this game to be amazing, even as a teenager, but after having played the game multiple times now, I can really see just how unfocused the plot and themes are. The game tries to set up a clash of ideals between the protagonist Yuri and his best friend / rival Flynn, but that never really goes anywhere and doesn't get properly resolved. Both Yuri and Flynn want to help those in need and fix the injustices in the world around them. Yuri represents getting immediate results via vigilantism, and Flynn represents upholding the law to fix things in the system. Yuri is a criminal as a result, and Flynn, being a member of the Knights, has every right to arrest him, but he never does. If the game was trying to do something interesting, like Flynn intentionally using Yuri to clean up the trash in the shadows, while Flynn plays by the rules, Yuri acting as Flynn's shadow, it certainly doesn't come across that way. Instead, it just seems like Flynn lacks the resolve to act upon his ideals. Which gets into my issue with Yuri's character, or rather how he's handled. It sometimes feels like the entire game world is built to make Yuri look good. He's a cool character, but he never faces any real opposition, and the game never really tries to introduce any gray morality and entertain the notion that Yuri could be wrong. Everyone and everything bends over backwards for him, and it hurts the writing as a result. Now, Yuri certainly isn't the worst shield character in the series, but it really needed to be mentioned, because none of the characters ever really have an issue with Yuri, which I think makes the whole vigilantism angle for Yuri weaker, since he faces no opposition to his ideals, other than a flaccid attempt with Flynn. The game can be cleanly broken up into 3 large story arcs, and while the first 2 feel decently connected, the third one does not as much. I believe this game had 3 writers, and has been said to have been written similarly to an anime, where different writers handle different episodes under the supervision of a director. The game certainly feels like it was written by several different people at times. At least the characters stay in character the entire way through, thankfully. Character writing for villains. As a final note when it comes to the writing, the villains in Vesperia do not hold up well at all. The only one who is actually interesting is a character named Jaeger, but you don't learn a whole lot about him in the main story, and he's unfortunately a minor character rather than a major antagonist. There is a villain you face at the end of each of the 3 main story arcs. The first one is a throwaway minor villain. It's not too bad since it's the first arc of the game. You don't really expect much from a villain that you would defeat that early on. Then the second arc villain is painted as this evil mastermind that did a bunch of stuff off screen, and it's supposed to be a plot twist that he's evil or something, but you've barely seen the freaking character by the time they reveal he's a villain. As such, you don't have much emotional investment in this reveal, or in the eventual beatdown of the character. The aforementioned villain does take away one of your party members for an extended period of time though, so at least that makes you want to beat them up. Side quests and missables. Moving on to one more issue with Vesperia, it's the missable side quests. For an RPG that came out in 2008, Vesperia has some really archaic side quest management. This is something the game has in common with one of its predecessors, Tales of the Abyss on the PlayStation 2. There is no way to track side quests in-game, and lots of side quests require you to do specific things at a specific time, or else you are locked out of the side quest for the rest of the playthrough. This can mean missing interesting quest lines, missing unlockable costumes, missing arts, missing one of the optional dungeons, and missing weapons for characters. Later games in the series remedy this issue, but in Tales of Symphonia, for example, which came out before Vesperia and before Abyss, this issue didn't really exist quite as bad, because while the game didn't keep track of side quests for you, not as many side quests were missable. You basically need a guide to do all the side quests and optional stuff in Vesperia, but it's best not to use a guide when you're playing the game for the first time, because it kind of ruins the experience, and while there are some spoiler-free guides, some guides could spoil stuff for you, so be careful about that. Character models during cutscenes. Something else that doesn't hold up well in Vesperia are the character models' animations, or rather the lack thereof. Now, in battle, the characters animate wonderfully, and this is clearly where the developers spent most of their time. In cutscenes, however, the models don't have that many animations. This is not really a big deal to me though, since your eyes tend to focus on the word bubbles, and this wasn't that unusual for games of the time. Lastly, I'd like to talk about the gameplay. You may be wondering, I thought you were praising the gameplay earlier. I was. However, there are some people who find the game's controls to be a bit clunky, and honestly, I can see where they're coming from. This is particularly true when it comes to trying to perform certain types of cancels to continue your combos. It's not as easy as I feel it should be. There are certain aspects of movement that can feel a little stiff or awkward as well, though none of it is egregious enough to bring down the experience significantly in my opinion, but some people will find it to be a turnoff. I tend to think of it as the game requiring deliberate inputs from the player, but it can be too strict for sure. Also, one issue with Vesperia's gameplay is that in order for it to truly shine, you have to put in time. I personally find this to be a positive trait of the game. As I mentioned before, I don't really like how in recent games you can play as a character for 5 minutes and you already know pretty much everything about how to use them effectively. In the older games, it took more time to learn how to play them, with Vesperia probably requiring the largest time investment. It takes time to unlock all the passive skills for the characters, it takes time to unlock all their arts. You can only get some skills and arts in the post-game, requiring you to keep playing after the final boss. It requires significant practice via battling as well to learn how to combo well with each character, and so on. But of course, exploring this depth is totally optional. However, without exploring the depth of the combat system, the casual player will not get to do as much flashy stuff, and they may feel that the game is a little flat or boring in combat. The skill ceiling and skill floor are much higher in this game to do cool stuff in, compared to the Xilias, Cecilia, or Berseria, for example. Now, it may sound like I've been complaining a lot for the past couple of minutes, but keep in mind, Vesperia is one of my favorite games, and it's my second favorite Tales game. All in all, despite its flaws, I think the game holds up well to this day due to its visuals, presentation, sheer breadth of content, and the depth and accessibility of its gameplay. The good outweighs the bad strongly in this game, in my opinion. Hopefully, you're planning on getting the Tales of Vesperia Definitive Edition, because I know I am. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe, and also let me know in the comments below, have you played Vesperia before or not, and what are your thoughts on the game? Thanks for watching, Musabori Man out.